Time for some good old-fashioned Viking fantasy. God of Vengeance is the first book in the Rise of Sigurd series by British author Kristian. It was written in 2014 and it takes place around 936, I think. I wrote 975, but I feel like that's wrong. 785, so way earlier. Holy up, 775. Whoa, this is very early. Okay. I forgot that, which is the early Viking age. I think it's from 700 to 1100 that we say the Vikings roamed, so roughly around there. The book is currently at a 4.24 on Goodreads with 3,000 ratings and 2,000 reviews, which seems very low to me, given Kristian has written multiple historical fiction books, and I can already tell you this is a good book. But alas, hopefully this can help him gain some more readers. Also, check out his YouTube channel where he has reenactments from his books as commercials for his books. It's pretty fun. Link in the description. Before we get to the book itself, let's talk about the cover here. The edition I have here is a picture taken of what I assume is supposed to be Sigurd, seen up close. It's quite an intense cover and stare we get, but it is basically just a guy with a sword, and I always dislike those. I think they're boring and often comes off as uninspiring. This is not a knock on the cover artist photographer, which is Jonathan Ring, and the back cover here is done by Archangel Images. I assume that's because it's some sort of stock photo maybe? I don't know, oil company. But yeah, no knock on Jonathan Ring for this. He probably got a prompt and a description from the publisher, and I assume he didn't have perfectly free hands to do whatever he wanted. So given that, I think it's good. But for a guy with a sword style of cover, this is, in my opinion, one of the better. We get some great intensity, and we see something in the eyes that just screams this is a man on a mission. It's also up close and personal, telling us that this is a personal story and the main character is not afraid to get into it. So even though I dislike this style of cover, it is one of the better ones. Now let's get into the review. However, warning, spoilers ahead. I love how Kristian uses language. Every expression, description, everything just oozes early Middle Ages Scandinavia. And given this one takes place super early, and that we have King Gorm, which is kind of funny because the earliest, latest I guess this book could take place, looking at historically, is 936, because that's when King Gorm the first time was mentioned as King of Denmark. So assuming that, right, and if we looked at chapter 1 where it's not prologue took place even earlier, then this is 780, that's way too soon. The reason I assumed there was a reference, it might still be a reference, but first I assumed it was the Danish King Gorm, because we do have, at least from what I could find, one German monk stating that Gorm was from Norway originally, but from what I can tell he's the only source and we're not quite sure anyways. So I assume it's just a reference and the usage of a Scandinavian name from the time period. Now, what I like is Kristian understands that being a Viking is wrong. Viking was something you did. Also, he uses the proper names from Scandinavia without translating them into English. That does mean we get some, for non-Scandinavians, weird and difficult to read names. I'll be pronouncing the names as I would as a Dane, and not how they would probably be pronounced in English. Now let's talk about the story though. I for the most part like the story. For an action story about Vikings fighting, it has a slow pace, but it works great when fighting happens. The heightened pacing feels more intense, but even that, the pacing doesn't get that high. The story pacing is so slow that the battle on the ocean can stay at a slow pace and not feel boring or like nothing happens. For the most part that's fine, but at times the pacing is so slow that it becomes borderline boring, especially because Kristian describes everything in analogies or similes constantly, and he's good at it. It's just that at times it's too much. Now, Sigurd being our main character is great and all, but we don't really get too much into characterization from him. We see the world from his POV and thereby get a lot of characterization from the people of Skudeneshavn. I can't tell if the gods are real, but they almost seems to be, and I like that Sigurd can't interpret from the signs he sees what's going on. This is especially done well at the boat fight against Randver, where Sigurd correctly interprets a raven to be a bad omen and that they would lose. And my favorite part of this section is definitely Jarl Harald versus Mudlif. Their one-on-one is the part where the slow pace works great, because Kristian gets time to describe every single strike they do and how they react to them. We don't get the extensive fury of strikes that White barely manages to parry. No, we get Mudlif strikes with its spear at Harald's throat, but he manages to block by raising his shield and the spear gets locked into the shield. This is not a quote from the book, it's just an example. But it's great action that heightens the intensity in the fight. It also makes every strike seem important, and that's really something I feel like a lot of, especially dueling scenes, struggles with. And finally we end the section with everyone looking to Sigurd for him to gather the remaining men and save his sister while taking revenge on Gorm and Randver. So far, great start. The pacing's a little too slow at times, but overall I am really satisfied. Let's get to the next section. These chapters are so long. Most books would have done so many more chapters. Here the chapters almost feel like they are needed or required from the publisher, but not wanted from Kristian. This is chapter 6 to 12, and this is like the middle third of the book or something like that. Like chapter 6 starts here, just to put into perspective. This is chapter 6 on page 130. And then let's go to which chapter was that? This is 10. And then we keep going until we find another chapter. 11. Oh, 12. So this is insane. This is 6 chapters. Holy fuck. I do like it though. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is the visiting of the slave trading island. I don't think Sigurd ever honestly thought he could save his sister there. I think it was more of he wanted to make sure she was alive. The scene there was fun, albeit a little too short actually. I would have loved more world building stuff there, like what other Jarl's villages except for things about Randver and Gorm. But the Saved and Private Asgard section was gold. It was so fun and it showed that the Vikings can more than just brawl. It does show a certain amount of cunning. It's also not seen as dishonest way as many books of Vikings would show it. Instead, it is shown as a natural and logical way to approach certain problems, which again is mirrored in Norse mythology, where Odin or Loke is shown to use cunning and trickery to solve problems. It's refreshing to see that for once. Afterwards, we get a recreation of Odin hanging himself to himself by Sigurd doing that, and I love it. I love the way Kristian incorporates mythical stories in fun and somewhat realistic ways for the time. It's also fun to see how Asgard is treated with a certain amount of respect and fear. The book is still keeping it vague whether the characters are just mad or if the gods are actually real, and I really want to keep it that way, because it makes it so much more fun. Now, during the offering of himself to Odin, Sigurd gets these visions telling him of his future. And the book does keep it nice and vague if they're hallucinations from the wound, lack of food and water, or if it's actually the gods. Also, as a Dane, it's kind of funny to hear all the epithets of the gods, depending on if it's Odin when he's wise, they need the trickster version, or the warrior version, or the dead ruler version. Because you typically only have done that for like Greek, Roman, and Egyptian gods. And to be honest, it's not really something we in Denmark does a lot. Like, we will talk about how Odin is a trickster god, how he is king of the some of the fallen warriors and so on. But we don't really give him epithets. But it works great. I can't tell if it might be something you do in Norway or Iceland. But we don't do that in Denmark. But I like it still. I don't think it ruins it, and I don't think it would be completely wrong to highlight which version or which character trait of the god you wanna, like, you want help from, almost, if you can say it like that. Now next up, they travel north, and the entire section at Gorm's place was wild. I like some of it. I wasn't too fond of the Floki versus 4 guys, but I really like his first fight, where he just threw an axe. It's a callback to how Sigurd defeated Olaf, and the Sigurd's own fight where he actually used a kick to win the fight. Finally, I really like how Kristian has these very short sections of what new members of the crew is going through. Just enough so that we get an idea of them. And I wish we would have gotten that from the start, cause it's a great little mini break, kinda like a breather. But I'll take what we get. So yeah, that's the middle third. That was 6 chapters. Now let's get, I don't know, I think 6 chapters more, 12 to chapter some. That's chapter 1. That's I don't know why I'm looking this up. I should have written it down, but here we go. 20, so 8 chapters. So yeah, roughly a third. Yes, let's get to it. For not the first time, I managed to read an entire section forgetting to write notes. And it probably won't be the last time I do this. Now, the gang is traveling to Lysefjorden, which is such a great section. Not because of the people added to the team, but the way the group feels awe towards the mountains and the quietness of the fjord. This is the part where questioning if the gods are real makes the most sense. You feel the gods are watching, and the group gets a realization what they're up against. The gods are watching and no one knows if they like what they see. And then they find the outlaws and get their ass kicked. From this we get some kick-ass action, ending with multiple people joining the fleet. And I'd like to take a minute here pointing out something interesting. No one in the group is a no-name character. All of them are named characters who talks and banters, some more than others, but you know right away that this is a close-knit group, or a group getting, closer, where no one is just member number X. And I gotta give it to Kristian, because that's not an easy thing to do, yet he does it with what feels like relative ease. I think in the future installments we will get a romance between Sigurd and Valgerd. However, I'm glad we don't get in this one. Then we get to the old folks to join the team, and I gotta admit I have mixed feeling about it. On one hand, it's awesome to get these super experienced warriors on the team. On the other hand, they're gonna die in this book. It just oozes right away, and I wish it wasn't so. Also, the way which Sigurd recruits them is, at best, mediocre. It felt like watching Naruto using his Talk no Jutsu. Basically, he talked them into joining him, and I think that's sad. I would have loved for them to just seize the opportunity to join a warband on their own. And final thing I want to talk about is the attack on Jarl. It was pretty smart to use the boats as a divergent and lure good amount of soldiers away from the Jarl. But what I'm more happy for is we don't know yet what happened to Ciso. The ballsy move on the Jarl in his own hall is perfect and just in character for Sigurd. But it made me realize a lot of the planning is done off screen and everyone acts as if it's talked through, which is common, but I would like if we got to see some of the planning instead of just the result of it every single time. It would have been fun if we had like interspersed between the planning and them doing it, so kinda they're talking it through as we're seeing them doing it, or something like that. And they don't have to do it for this final one, they could have done it for some of the smaller things. It just seems a little odd. The entire fight was good, but also predictable. I'm glad the old warriors got a proper send-off, and I'm glad they saved Rune and all. But whereas the fight between Olaf and Skarf was short but good, the fight between Sigurd and Randver felt off. They were both short fights, but one of them felt like it was correct, whereas the other one felt too easy. Because with Skarf and Olaf, they are both formidable opponents, so it's really just one mistake or one showing cleverness and that's it, but both really experienced. Whereas Sigurd and Randver, it's a grown man versus someone who just became an adult. It shouldn't be this easy for Sigurd in my opinion. So, yeah. But I can't wait to get my hands on the sequel. It was great fun reading it. It is a great book. Every book has flaws, so let's get to some conclusion on all of this and yeah. Let's get to the conclusion. It is refreshing to read a book about the Viking Age. Take such care to get names of people and places correct. Now I'm not Norwegian and I only ever been there on a skiing trip, but the names of people and places are correct as far as I can tell. And I love it, because I did look it up. Lysefjorden, for instance, does exist and so on. And so does Skudeneshavn. So it's great. I also can't state it enough that the vagueness of whether the guards are there or not is such a great trick. We shouldn't know if the guards are actually watching or if the people are just superstitious. I like that we get to see all these wild rituals and feats done in the name of the gods, but we aren't told if they made a difference. Now, final thing I want to highlight before we critique the book is the Rostov characters. I like that no member of Sigurd's group is a no-name. Of course, some gets nearly no word count while other gets a lot, and that's natural, that's fine. But we don't see any members of the group not get a name or nor isn't relevant to the group in some form. The only time is with the old timers where one of them dies earlier than the others, and we only really get his name, but he still meant something. He was still important. He wasn't a random member of the crew. Now, my main critique is that Sigurd is at times a little too good at handling his situation. It really is only at the end where we see him getting into problems with his plan, and even then it works out for him against the odds. I would have loved for him to fail at something. I mean, he did fail at the slave market, but that's it, and I didn't really feel like that they were actually gonna do anything. Like, he failed, he was like, oh shit, maybe I should start thinking, and then you start thinking and never fail. But because he always manages to fight or talk his way out of any situation, and I really don't want the sequel to be like that. I want him to struggle more. But that is my only problem, and to sum it up, I think it's a shame this book isn't more well known, and it should be read by any fans of Vikings or historical fiction. So yeah, I can only recommend it. Next up we will be looking at We Lie with Death by Devin Madsen.